I'm your host, Daniel James II, and we're back at it again with Season 3 of the Culture Connect, the podcast for the South Carolina Commission for Minority Affairs. Inspired by the vision of our Executive Director, Dr. Dolores DaCosta, we bring forward the voices of the forgotten, the stories of the unheard, and the realities of the marginalized in the Palmetto State. This season, you're going to hear from community organizers, business owners, nonprofit experts, tribal leaders, filmmakers, men and women, striving every day to make South Carolina a great place to live for all of its citizens. Be sure to follow us on all digital platforms so you don't miss the next episode of the Culture Connect. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Culture Connect. We have a very, very special guest in the studio today. We have one of CMA's own. We have none other than Mr. Ivan Segura. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course. Ivan, tell us your role here at the Commission.
I'm the Director of Multicultural Affairs and Community Engagement.
Mm-hmm. And that's a lot. What do you do?
It's a fancy title that I have. And basically what I get to do is bring our different divisions together. We have 4 divisions: African American, Native American, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and Hispanic Latino. So part of my activities is to make sure that they are all working together, understanding that even though we are different communities, we have a lot of things in common as minorities in South Carolina, and just making sure that that happens. And also the community engagement part, which is making sure our program coordinators are out in the community meeting the constituents that need our services. And I think each one on their division, I think we have the perfect person. Each one of them is working towards the betterment of their communities. We have a very good team because they are very eager to learn. They are very eager to help their communities.
Absolutely. And I tell you, going back to our executive director's vision for last year, which was to build bridges, close gaps. It's interesting. You get to do that in a very intimate way because of the way in which your coordinators that you oversee, they're on the ground, meeting with people, hosting events in person. They've done some great things in the past year. I do want to talk to you a little bit about your road to the commission, though, because you started here in 2019. Well, not here. You started on Greystone in 2019. I do want to talk about your road here. You've been in the U.S. for a long time, since 2002, yes. I believe. But you're originally from Mexico, right? Talk about where you're from, your roots, and some of those early beginning memories, I guess.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Aguascalientes, Mexico, as a city it's actually in the dead center of Mexico. You were to draw a square around the state and pinpoint the center of Mexico. That's where the state is. It's about a million people. It's not that big when you talk about Mexico cities, but it was very important because back in the time when you try to go from the north to the south of Mexico, you'll take a train to go from there, and that was the way you had to cross through Aguascalientes. So it almost became like the middle point from going to the north to the south, or south to the north, and that's what it became very increasingly interesting and powerful at some point, because even when we had the revolution, that was the place where the 2 armies from the north and the south met in Aguascalientes to have a convention, and it became historically known because of that, because the convention in the revolution times. But that's where I was born and raised. I think a lot of people don't realize that I went to college in Mexico. That's when I completed my degree in financial administration. And I never thought I was going to end up here in South Carolina. I mean, to be honest with you, back in the time.
Mm-hmm. Now, you have a beautiful story about how you ended up meeting your wife and then learning English as well. Yeah. Talk about that story.
Yeah, and that's part of the genesis of me ended up here, is that once I completed college, I got a scholarship from the Secretary of Foreign Affairs to study English. And I went to Belize, which even for my friends and family, they had no idea that they speak English in Belize, because they were a British colony all through the 1980s. So I had a scholarship to go there for 1 year to learn English. And then while I was in there, my get to know that I knew it was going to be my wife came to live in the same house guest that I was living on. So she's from Kentucky and she took a semester abroad. She went to Belize to study natural resources and we ended up living in the same house. So that's how we get to know each other. I tell this story that I'm an introvert, so I'm kind of shy. And I always tell her, like, if you were not living in the same house that I was living, I'd probably be telling you right now from that beautiful American girl that I saw once in Belize, and I never got myself to go and talk to her. But the fact that we were living at the same house made that process a little bit easier for me. Also, I was pretending that I wanted to talk to her because I wanted to practice my English, but I was swept away from her from the first time I saw her. I was like, I like this girl. I need to talk to her. So we started hanging out, and again, because I wanted to speak English, but then we were together for 4 months, and then we had a long distance relationship for 2 years. And I got to the point when I was in Mexico and thinking about her, and I decided, like, I think this is it, like I want to be with her, and then she wanted to be with me, and then we just make it happen. Wow. And then we get married. We live in Mexico for 2 years. Because she's from Kentucky, we came to South Carolina on our way to get close to Kentucky. But then that just didn't happen, I guess, because we're both bilinguals and we got very, very good opportunities here in South Carolina. That's when we decided to stay, because we got jobs and then we were looking for a job. You know how it is when you have a good job and then you don't really look for another one. So up to this point, we still had the idea that we're going to get close to Kentucky, but I don't think it's going to happen anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, just working with you, I had no idea you're an introvert. I had no idea. Amazing. The other thing I was going to say is that's a beautifully romantic story, but also, like, I guess that changed sort of the course of your life too, in terms of what you wanted to do. And it's interesting because you do a lot of help with a lot of ESL communities now, but you're actually like a product of ESL help process informally, I guess, through your wife. And then I do want to talk about when you came to the US in 2002, when you came to the US, you were engaged in a lot of outreach efforts and work. One, where did that passion for advocacy and, I guess, cross-cultural exchange, but also outreach, like, where did those passions really come from? I guess was it from your degree program? Was it from your home? Or how'd you get involved in that?
No, and this is a question I get all the time, like why and how. I guess I've always been a big thinker into like learning how we interact with each other as humans. I've always been very, very interested in equality and justice. My degree is in financial administration, so at some point I started looking at budgets and resources and wondering why it's not coming to all communities and only to certain communities, why it's only helping some groups of people and not others. And when I moved to South Carolina, I think I was lucky enough to get a position with the South Carolina Hispanic Outreach, which is a nonprofit organization. And they are still around. And my first position in there was as an administrative assistant. At some point, I've been there only for 2 months, and a program coordinator was doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing, got fired. And they turned around and say, who has a degree and who speaks English? And I was the only person in the staff at that moment that I had a bachelor's degree and enough command of the English language to take that position. And then I found myself as part of a health education project and going to meetings with epidemiologists and doctors and public health officials. But like I just mentioned, my point was always like, hey, what about the Hispanic community? I just reviewed your data for services last year and I see that you're not helping this. What are you not helping this community? And then I realized the power of just going to meetings and just raising your hand and be like, hey, what about the Hispanic community? And then I also learned, like, the more I prepare myself, like I just talk about the budget, and I'll come and say, hey, your budget last year was $2 million, but I don't see any allocation in here to minority communities. And that's, I think, as an immigrant myself and going to that process of getting to a new place when you're not aware of resources, but then also learning that the resources are there, that just became my passion to say, hey, why is this happening the way it's happening? What can we do to improve the system? And number two, how can I help my community to get to know about these resources and also the process? Because I think they call it navigating the system, It's different when you're an immigrant. You have no idea of the resources available. But then I learned even from people that are here that have been disenfranchised for so long, they're also not aware. It's almost like they are immigrants on their own communities because they don't know that there is a system that was created in a way that's not equitable, that is not conducive to help all kinds of people because it's always the same people designing the same programs for the same group of people. That's when we come in. That's when we play a vital part a lot of times just to say, hey, this is not right. Somebody needs to do something. And that's something that you see me working in the community. I will say that all the time. It's like sometimes all you need is somebody to speak up and say, hey, this is not right. Somebody needs to do something. And I mentioned about being an introvert. Why? Because being an introvert doesn't mean that you're shy. I am not shy. I can speak up. It means like it doesn't come natural to me. Sometimes I need to prepare. I need to say what I'm going to say. And also it gets to a point when I get people out. I'm just like, it's too much. I just had to retreat right now. And I'm so glad now mental health is so prevalent that people think about that you can tell people, hey, it's okay not to be okay. But also for me, it's okay to understand that as an introvert, I do need my times of solitude and to be alone and not talk to anybody. But that recharged me to then go out and fight with anybody that has not followed the rules to respect my community.
Yes. I love when you talked about serving as a place where in such a vital position, especially in Hispanic outreach, but just in roles where you were able to sort of advocate for people having access to unknown or unlocked, untapped resources. There can be such a knowledge gap because of language, because of just being unfamiliar to this country, especially if you're coming in with a immigrant or refugee background, etc. I remember an event we went to earlier that I think you were part of either organizing or had some relation to. It was related to, I believe, work trafficking or violence or trafficking in general. And the lack of rights that people coming to the country feel that they have when it comes to labor and self-determining who they work for, what those conditions look like, etc. If it weren't for the work that advocacy services like that do, people for whom English is not their first language, they would not know that it's available. And they actually do have a say in how they're treated and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and to that, two things that are important. About like 20 years ago, I think it was like 2004, they invited me to USC to do a presentation. And what they say is like, tell us how does it feel to be a Latino in South Carolina? And I thought about it, and I'm a writer, I'm a poet, so I always trying to come with phrases or something that's going to represent the feeling. And the word that I came up at that time was debilitating. It's because like that's how I felt as an immigrant being to a new place. That's how I know a lot of my community feels. They feel debilitated. Is because even if you have a degree from a different country, they feel that they cannot use it here. Even if they have knowledge and experiences and wisdom, they feel that they cannot transmit that into a second language. Even when you are from here and English is your first language, being a Latino, you sometimes feel like you do not belong or there are no spaces or welcoming spaces for you. And I also learned, and it's sad to say, I say this 20 years ago, the number one issue that we have in the Latino community is lack of access to information. That means that there are resources and opportunities and activities and all these things to do, and the community doesn't know. At the same time, for government and organizations and agencies, there are needs and wants and projects that this community has, and they don't know. So that information is not flowing from one to another for whatever reason. And we could talk about like the many issues that we have in transferring that, but that's been a lot of my goal for 20 years now. Is just to make sure that when I hear that there is an agency that's providing these services, how do I make sure that information gets to the community? And it's still happening right now, because I just had a meeting today when somebody was saying that we were unable to reach out to the Hispanic community. And the first thing they say, it's because we don't have any bilingual staff. And I'm like, you don't need to be bilingual to reach out to this community. Yes, we do have a significant portion of my community that speaks Spanish, but guess what? I prefer Spanish. Yet I'm speaking to you in English. We have a lot of people that are bilingual, and we have a lot of community brokers that can help you. Or I can tell you that you were to try to reach to this community in English, you'll get to at least 75% of them. So you still can do it, but educating organizations and agencies and people about how to reach out to the community is a big part of this too. And at the same time, we have a community that also needs to come out from the comfort zone and be like, hey, if you want to learn more about the resources, then go and ask questions. Then go and enter this agency and see what services you can get. Make sure that you are always trying to improve yourself, and you just stay in that area where you feel that there is no opportunities is because you never look for the opportunities.
You know, one of the main things we say when we talk to people about what we do at the commission is that, you know, CMA does not provide any direct services, but we do a lot of linking of communities. Like you talked about someone calling your phone and saying that they weren't able to reach or get in contact or with this particular community or have different types of calls like that, or needs a certain service or a certain business tool or maybe translation or whatever it might be. They may call your phone, and did so especially when you were Hispanic Latino program manager. Talk about, you know, when you first started at CMA. Well, first of all, how'd you come to CMA in 2019? And when you first started and the major responsibility, I'm sure there was a moment where you realized how hefty a responsibility it is to be the middleman between direct services and the public citizens of South Carolina.
Yeah, for that, I mean, I will start by saying a referral is a direct service. So I get a lot of phone calls. Why? Because I give my phone number to everybody, especially now. And I've said this before too, is I spent 17 years advocating for this community as a volunteer because it wasn't my job. And I did it as a volunteer because that's my passion, to help people. And I finally found a job when they pay me to do this. And I'm very grateful to the commission for the opportunity. But I also understand that I'm a public servant, that the people's taxes pay my job. And this is something that I'm also trying to inculcate to our program coordinators, is that if you send an email, make sure that your telephone number is there. If somebody calls you, make sure that you answer that phone call, because as public servants, this is what we are required to do. We are using their money for our salary. That's why sometimes people find it crazy, like I did last weekend when I asked everybody, pull out your phone and write down my number. That is my cell phone. And if you need something, you will call me. So at the same time that I'm promoting people calling me for services, I need to make sure that I have the information to provide them when somebody calls me and say, hey, I'm looking for an immigration lawyer. Here it is. I need help to develop my business. Well, we have the Small Business Development Corporation. That's their job. And that's what I'm trying to tell everybody. Like, this is your job. This is what you're supposed to do as an agency. And you should have no excuse that, oh, we don't have somebody that speaks Spanish. We just talk about that. You don't need Spanish-speaking people. You need the intention to help. Also, if you are entrusted in doing this work and you're not doing it, then you need to do something to improve your services, because you are not providing services for everybody. Now, something that I'm saying is, especially when I'm talking about the Native American community, it's about 1% of our population here in South Carolina. But what I say is, like, you know, that 1% prevents you from being 100%. So you want to help 100% of our communities, you need to help that 1% too. Because guess what? 99% will never be 100% unless you have that 1%. That's how important it is. And not only because the significance for our history and who they are in our communities, it's also because it is true. 99 cents is not $1. It's not. And you're close. You're almost there. But that's how you defend minority communities, by saying, hey, well, you know, you also need that 1%. And also now, when I was working only with the Latinos, which were about like 7 to 8% of the community, now that I'm directing all the minority areas, where we get to 42%. And that's the power that we have as minorities, to say, hey, I'm not begging you for money. I'm telling you from your budget, ethically and equitable, we should be getting 42% of those funding for our minority communities. 42%, because that's what our communities represent. Now, I know what they're going to tell me. Oh, you know, we don't know how to reach it. That's why we have 4 program coordinators that are experts on those areas. That's why they have an advisory committee. That's about 80 people that are experts on these communities. And that's why we're here, not only to point out the problem, to also offer a solution for you. which is if you really want to work with them, we can help you. Number two, special state agency, you're required to do it. That's where we're here to help you do it.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the growth in, I guess, minority population. I wanted to mention a research statistic. Since you started at CMA in 2019, the Hispanic community, or at least Spanish-speaking population in South Carolina has grown from 224,000 people to, I believe, about 236,000.
Yeah.
So it's been about like a 5% increase in the Spanish-speaking community. Hispanic, similarly, 330,000 to maybe about 350,000 similarly. Talk about what area, when you look at the state of South Carolina, what particular facet of culture do you not see Hispanic or Latino people represented in? Is it the arts? Because I know that you're very passionate about the art scene. Is it in entrepreneurship? Is it in government? Like, what part of culture do you believe they're underrepresented in? Yeah,
because I think it's been since 2000. Like by the time I moved in here until now, the Hispanic community has grown 375%. And right now, I think it's like 375,000 Latinos. And these are the ones that are included on the census, which we know the number is probably lower than it should be. But the important part of this growth is that we have a lot of younger Latinos in here. Like, that's when I see a lot of the influence that we need to do is policy making on the education system, for example, to make sure that these new students that are coming in here are receiving adequate services like everybody else. We understand that a system that sees an influx of newcomers and people that sometimes speak a different language, we understand that it's hard. What we don't understand is when they decide not to do anything about it, especially when we can inform and tell them, hey, you see this is changing. And we see the rural communities when they will say, yeah, all of a sudden 20% of our student body is Latino. So like, well, we also have Latinos represented in here. Why don't we start a program where we can get Latino teachers in the schools? Or how do we do it to make sure that we have a system that's servicing them, that like I said, that's equitable, that everybody's getting the same opportunities that they need to succeed. Where I see the lack of representation is in positions of higher decision-making positions. That's when you don't see Latinos. That's when we need to see more. And if by extension, also for all minority communities. And this is something that I get to see when I get meetings and conferences and activities when I go to them. And then we say, well, yeah, I see Latinos in these areas, but once I get to the director position, to executive director, to the higher positions, then you don't see any minorities. And that's also part of our advocacy. So like, you need to get the minority communities to the places where decisions are going to be made. I've been advising a lot of organizations on that to say, hey, how are you going to change your culture inside your organization? By providing spaces for those people in the decision-making rooms. That's how you actually change the system. We see this all the time. Minority communities disproportionately affected by, and then you can add anything you want in there, by lack of access to education, by housing, affordable housing, by healthcare services. It's always happening. Why? Because as long as we continue to be an afterthought in the programs, meaning that they have the program and they're like, oh, maybe we should translate this to Spanish. Or we had the program like, I wonder why the African American community is not accessing these services. Or we had the program and then they say, how do we get this to the Native American communities? Because we're an afterthought. If you have somebody in that room making the decision, he's going to make sure that we are into the program, into the system. That is a program that's considering all of this instead of like, oh, what are we going to do? Why are Latinos not coming to the services? Because you didn't design it for all the community. You designed it for one community, or you were not thinking about the different types of people that we have in our communities.
And I believe that that's one of the things I do love about the commission is that we aren't an afterthought. Minority communities are not. They are the first thought, and they're a priority and centered, especially when it comes to, you talked about inadequate housing, having affordable housing rather, business tools, equipping minorities with the adequate business tools, which leads me actually to some of the projects that you began in your role as Hispanic Latino program manager. I want you to give like, because I know that the Hispanic Latino, I think, business summit is something that you, I believe, started. And then the student summit as well, the Hispanic student summit. Those were like two big passion projects that you had. So talk about how those came about.
Yeah, and I think this comes from having worked with this community and having an understanding of what they need.
Mm-hmm.
Something that we hear for Latinos all the time is the advisory group
mm-hmm.
to the mayor of this or that, or the Hispanic advisory committee for the governor of this or that, and something. And sometimes I hear even my fellow advocates saying like, hey, hashtag goals, like we want, hey, we are the evolution of that. We are a state agency, and this was implemented in 1994, which is a long time ago. Before that, we used to be an ad hoc group here or something like that. Because the big issue with those advisory committees to the mayors or to the this or that is that as soon as the mayor is gone, the whole advisory committee is gone. And whatever activities they have done disappear because it's a different person at the helm of that municipality or organization or something. Like for us to be a state agency, that's something that's very, very important. That's also that for my program coordinators, I keep telling them, remember, you are the Commission for Minority Affairs. You are an state agency, and that's part of your power. And that's how you can influence. That's why when I was working with this community, I knew one of the things they're going to ask me is like, hey, do you know Latino media, for example? So like, yeah, and I had that question all the time. It's like, that's why we created the Latino Media and Community Organizations Guide, which is available still on our website. You go in there like, hey, it has the list of all the community organizations, Latino, that can help you. Organizations that have access to people, and the Latino media and all of that. We also created a statewide working group for the Latino and immigrant communities. And this is a list of people that, again, these are our community brokers, people that have access to people, because that's a question that I get all the time. And you can go in there and see, okay, in the Charleston area, it's going to be like 10 names that you can call these people. They provided us with that information, which means they are working for the community and they want to do this. And then, like you mentioned, the Latino Student Summit. And that's something that I'm very proud that I initiated, is because I understand our youth is changing. I understand in my community we have this big group of Latinos. I can tell you that our own research here on the agency detected that 92.7% of Latinos in South Carolina that are younger than 18 years old are American citizens. As an advocate, that's very, very powerful and very, very important. To let everybody know, our young Latinos, 92.7% are American citizens. And when we talk to them, they will tell us that, hey, opportunities to go to college, how do we do this and that? And I knew they were going to ask for that information. We actually did a survey through them. And they were asking, like, how do I find information to go to college? How do I find scholarships? But something that they reply, and it was on the open-ended question. And people never answer that. It's always like, they never put anything like that. But they added in there that they needed more role models, that they needed welcoming spaces, and they needed for us to foster a sense of belonging. So that's when we realized, like I mentioned before, like positions or Latinos in higher end positions will be like, hey, let's try to give them some speakers that are Latino, that look like them, that have stories that are similar to them or the parents, and that they can reflect and be like, hey, we do have hundreds of people. And I heard that in my community that say, well, nobody's helping me. It's like, we have hundreds of people across the state trying to help. A lot of them, this is not their job. They do it because, again, they have a passion also to help their communities. But making sure that they are visible has been a lot of what I've been trying to do with the students lately. It's like, there are people, we have directors of organizations, we have managers, we have VIPs, we have all kinds of people that can help you. But making sure that we are bringing that information to them is important so they can see themselves on that. Something I can tell you on that, me getting older, I'm morphing into more of a mentor stage. I used to be the guy that I wanted to do everything, I wanted to be in every single meeting. I wanted to be in every single community event. I wanted to be here and there. And I'm learning like, hey, you need to teach other people to do this too. You need to be a mentor to them so they see that it is possible. And that also comes with the achievements that I had in the past. I want to tell people now. So when they ask me like, yeah, I get this and I got that award and I've been working on this and that, And I want them to know that I'm a director at a state agency. And as a Latino, I'm proud to represent that community.
And how does that desire to mentor, because now that you stepped into this director role for the multicultural divisions, you get to mentor the coordinators in a way in terms of professionally, African American Affairs, AAPI, Native American, but also now Alex, who's Hispanic Latino Affairs Program Coordinator, and he actually started, manager now, and he started though as an intern. So what is that? Has that fulfilled that sort of mentorship desire, or are there other ways that you pursue that?
Yeah, I think like I say this all the time. When you're young, you have all the energy and the ideas, and what you don't have is the connections or the money. And what I'm trying to teach my coordinators is like, hey, develop those connections. Get together with other people that have connections. Understand the power that you have to, as a state agency, as an immigrant, as the community that you're coming from. Because this is something, sometimes we don't realize how powerful our voice is until you say something and somebody tells you, I didn't know that. And for us, part of a minority community, that happens all the time. When you tell somebody, hey, well, you know, this and this and that, somebody, oh, I didn't know that. You see, I just educated you. And I also learned that I have that power to then educate more people about this. Because I used to have a presentation that was called 42 cents. And when I did it, I started by saying, like, hey, what can you buy with 42 cents? Let's talk about this and ask a few questions, a piece of gum, not even water or something. And then I revealed to everybody that that's the minimum wage in Mexico. And you could see the reaction from most people in the room. They'll be like, wait, what? Yeah, that's the minimum wage in Mexico, 42 cents. So now, if we don't understand basic economic information like that, how are we going to understand the immigration process? How are we going to understand that a lot of times it's not that people just want to come, it's people don't have any more opportunities. Or people understand that if I come in here, I'm going to make it a lot more money than what I'm doing in there. So we have what we call the pushing and pulling factors, which is some factors are pushing Mexico, or people out of their home countries, and some pulling factors are bringing me in here. But that's the power of their voices. And with our program coordinators here in the agency, part of that is like for them to understand not only that they have their power, but they've been entrusted with that mission. Like every paycheck that they get, they need to understand like, hey, we are paying you to do something for our communities. We are paying you to make this an agency that hopefully will change the idea of a government employee. Because why? Because we do work in here. Because we're doing activities. Because we're doing stuff that hopefully is going to change that paradigm of having communities as a disenfranchised members of our community, of our society, bring them into the activities that are happening for everybody else.
And I'll never forget when I first came to the agency in 2022, I was an intern and I had the opportunity to share space with the small business program manager or coordinator at the time. And we went to a meeting with the South Carolina Department of Transportation with a bunch of other entrepreneurs who were contracted out to clean or do something that related to public transportation, buses or vehicles. And I asked him, I remember in that meeting, I was asking him about small businesses and what is the biggest sort of gap between a small business being, mom and pop forever versus like a small business that can function or be self-sustaining, or an enterprise that can sustain a staff and actually like do well long term. And the main answer that he had was the access to capital. And sometimes just not being in rooms where where funding or grants are available, or how to, if you do have a janitorial service that can clean public transportation, but you don't have the access to know, how do I get a contract for that? Like, and how do I, contract with SCDOT or get federal funding to do something like that? Like, even those opportunities, a lot of times, sometimes that knowledge is just, that's the gap. The knowledge is the gap to that. That could bridge someone from poverty to prosperity. So
that's an issue that continues to happen, is the people that are inside the system keep benefiting from the system because they know how to do They know about the system. They know how to use the system. And when there are new opportunities, the system will tell them about that. And then you have all these other people around that are not connected to that system. And even when opportunity would come, they are not ready to take it because they were not informed before of what they were supposed to be doing. And while we continue to do it the same way, then we're going to continue to have disenfranchised communities. And you're going to find them in all places because of that, because we never stop. And we mentioned this before. You didn't design your program to include those, because a lot of times what happens is like, this is a beautiful program. So like, yeah, but do you understand that we have an imperfect society, right? Like not everybody's on the same level. Not everybody has the same skills. How are you going to make sure that your perfect program is helping everybody? And that what goes back to equitable, is that no, is the fact that you have the application in Spanish doesn't mean that that's it. It's more like, do you consider that some people have a level of education that's different? Do you consider that some people do not have the network that other communities have, or the skills, or the people, or the groups, or the something? We talk about that with the 501c3 when we say, hey, sometimes we as small organizations are competing with the big organizations that have a staff of 4 people to make a grant. And how are you going to do it when you are one person that has a job and you have a passion project, which is to help your community by establishing a community garden? And then guess what? You didn't get it because organization X something, I'm not going to say names, got it. And they get it all the time. It's because the person giving the money is not considering how the level is not, the field is not level for everybody. Right. Is that some people get a lot more money because they made it to a point when they got millions of dollars to hire people just to be accessing this money. And that happens also with companies, like you were mentioning. It's like those small companies keep being small and tiny is because I think we need to come with a micro business instead of a small business, because then when you read the definition of small business, I think you can have up to 50 employees, and that's not a mom and pops.
Yes, very true.
Business, that's a bigger one that's gonna have different resources available to them.
There was intentionality at every part of your journey, and learning people and learning to love people is part of that. I definitely came from the Men of Color Summit not too long ago, and I was in a session that was led by a group of Latino men who talked about masculinity. And they were teaching a workshop, I believe, about masculinity. And when I was leaving the room, I told them where I worked. They said, "Oh, Yvonne's usually here." So your impact is far-reaching, even in the upstate of South Carolina, and even in helping develop Latino people and young men too.
I have a quick funny story about that, because for Men of Color about 3 years ago, I sent a presentation that I did this weekend. That's called The Wondrous Journey of a Latino Advocate. But I think they didn't know what to do with that. They actually called me and said, it's about advocacy. Like, it's about advocating for your community. But this goes to whoever is listening to this. It's not easy to advocate. It takes time. Sometimes people misunderstand what you do. We all feel sometimes that we're alone and nobody else is around. We all feel like we need more support. And it's because it is true. We talk about how fast it's growing. That also means that sometimes we don't have but one guy working, for example, in education, or one guy that's making efforts to promote bilingual education or interpreters, or somebody that's trying to get a certification for interpreters. So there is you always feel alone because we are all pioneers. And in the same token, I remember I heard this phrase a few years ago when somebody said, she was from a different state and said, well, I got to this position and then I realized I'm standing in the shoulders of giants, meaning that there were people before her that allowed her to get to that point. But I can tell you, in South Carolina, when it comes to advocacy, we're all giants, because there were no giants before us. And then you realize that after you've done this for years and years and years and years, you're like, no, I'm not a little, I'm a giant. I'm a giant. And nobody needs to step on my shoulders. Why? Because you are a giant too. And it's not like you're stepping on my shoulders to get there. It's like you're walking alongside me and then we're doing this together. But that's visually that's helping me to tell the community, respect what you do, be proud of what you do, but also understand as a pioneer, you're going to find yourself alone sometimes. And it's okay to deal with that, and you just keep pushing and you make it happen.
That's right. And if we have a generation of people that take advocacy, but particularly minority advocacy, very serious, there won't be more generations where we keep coming across firsts. First, and things that have been established for a long time. So I appreciate that. I appreciated knowing how far-reaching the impact of just humble public servitude how far that actually does go, and that is something to look up to, and that is something to aspire to. So I do appreciate you for that. Yvonne, are there any closing thoughts that you want to give, in any ways that the community can connect with what you're doing here at CMA or in the community?
Yeah, I guess I'll close with what I was just saying, like, for people to understand that our mission requires us to advocate for this community, to get to the goal of making South Carolina a more equitable place, that it takes time. It takes not only a lot of effort, but it also takes other people helping us. So if you never heard of the commission, please reach out to us. If you're trying to reach the minority communities, we can help you with that. But also understand that not only are we doing it with the best effort, that it takes time, that it's going to take a while for us to get there. But thankfully, here in South Carolina, we do have a commission that's at the state agency level, and that we will continue to work to bridge the gap between minority communities in South Carolina.
Did you enjoy the episode? I hope you did. Be sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and connect with us on all digital platforms so you don't miss the next episode of the Culture Connect. We'll see you next time, everybody.